I flew thousands of miles to Japan to answer one simple question. Does the Nintendo Museum acknowledge the company's former investments in love hotels?
Nintendo has existed for over 135 years. In that long, storied history, they've made a lot of products and invested in a lot of businesses. So I'm curious what makes the cut and what doesn't. Do they mention the love hotels, the love tester, Twister, taxis, photocopiers? What is Nintendo proud of? And what are they hoping you'll forget? The Nintendo Museum is housed in a former Nintendo factory in Uji, just south of Kyoto. That's in Japan. The museum opened in October 2024, less than a year ago at this point, so tickets are still a little hard to come by. I managed to get 2 in the last time slot of the day. The first visit was just to case the joint. I wanted to see where I could take photos, where I could take videos, what I could lick, how upsetting a lifetime ban would be. The second trip was to fact check my script, get additional footage, and to play more of the games. This video is really focused on how Nintendo represents itself as a museum. If you want a review of the arcade section, there either is or will soon be a video of that on my channel. If there's a clickable video thing here, then it is available now. If you want just a review of my overall experience with the museum, that is available on my Patreon, patreon.com/thejenna. Let me warn you now, this video is gonna have some repeated footage, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but mainly you can't take video or photographs or lick anything on the second story of the building, which is where the museum is. This area is so under wraps that in the model display of the museum, it's covered by a big question mark block. This footage is truly the best I could get of the second floor without breaking any rules. Images and videos do exist online. I will not be referencing them because I don't want to give Nintendo a reason for a takedown request of this video. And that's how self-censorship works. The museum opens with a photo opportunity in the courtyard, which not a lot of people were taking advantage of on either of my trips because it was 97 and 102 degrees out respectively.
You can lick these, but you can tell they don't like it.
Immediately upon entering the building, you can see and hear the sensational singing toads to absolutely everybody's delight, including mine. You cannot lick the toads. They are toxic. For an additional fee, you can take workshops on how to play Hanafuda or make a few Hanafuda cards. Hanafuda is a trick-taking game that was a popular form of gambling in Japan at the end of the 1800s, when most other kinds of gambling was banned. It was particularly popular amongst Yakuza, so a lot of companies wouldn't make them because of the criminal association. But Fusajiro Yamauchi wasn't so skittish. He founded Nintendo to make Hanafuda cards, and that's what they did for their first few decades. This is part of the reason why nobody is really certain what Nintendo means. The party line in modern times is that it probably means leave luck to heaven, where 10 refers to the word for heaven. But it might also stand for Tengu, the name of one of Nintendo's Hanafuda decks and a common symbol of gambling at the time. One of the very few placards that this museum actually has reinforces the fact that nobody is really certain what Nintendo means. And it's truly wild that of the 10 placards that exist here, one of them could just be a shrug emoji. Which, to clarify, is my main complaint about the Nintendo Museum. It's barely a museum. The best way I would describe it is a material archive. And I'll say, Nintendo is very upfront about the fact that it is product focused, but I was not prepared for how much it would be that to the exclusion of being a museum. The second floor is a series of display cases divided by era, console, and topic. At best, the items have a tag with their release date, their English name, and whether it was Japanese only or an international release. There is very little context on what anything is. There's no descriptions, no audio tour, no guidebook. No placards means no translations or multilingual signs, so from that standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. But it's strange for something that labels itself as a museum. I spoke to a couple that was coming out of the museum as I was going in, and I asked if they had learned anything, and one of them specifically called out the lack of placards or descriptions. They said that they didn't really learn anything because there wasn't any information about what anything was. And I was like, that was exactly my read on the situation. The inner curved shelves cover different consoles, Famicom, Game Boy, etc. They mostly displayed game boxes, cartridges, and consoles. physical materials. But they also had commercials or gameplay playing on screens on top. And those screens had little directional speakers so that when you were standing directly in front of them, you could basically only hear the audio from that screen. But it also meant while you were just walking around the museum, sometimes you would get winged by like the soundtrack for your first Kirby game or the original Mario coin sound and would be like, whoa. You were being buffeted by waves of nostalgia. Overall, it felt more like a catalog than a museum. The information you do get is largely framed in terms of Nintendo's innovation. So what famous series started on this console? What challenges did this system overcome? And I think this is fair. We don't often think of Nintendo as being technologically advanced or cutting edge, because at least in America, that means power. What's the most powerful? Nintendo has never really had the most powerful technology, but they are always innovating and coming up with really novel solutions for problems. For example, the section on the Nintendo 64 mentions the physical challenge of creating a controller that can easily move you around a 3D world for Super Mario 64.
We will not live in a two-dimensional world. We won't go in one direction or seek what we can say.
There's a diagram that shows you multiple ways to hold the controller, but it doesn't come out and say that they designed the controller to enable both 2D and 3D gameplay. They tell you about the innovation, but not who worked on it or how it came to be. The closest it gets to that was a display of system and controller prototypes. They had a bunch of wacky Wiimote controllers, round ones and ones that looked like a Super Nintendo controller with a Wiimote like plugged into it. You can tell they threw away the idea of what a controller was and started from scratch to get to the Wiimote. They also had an N64 controller made out of clay and one that didn't have like the wings on the side. They had a Game Boy made out of wood. It was like if Castaway was about a 90s kid. Of everything in the museum, these are definitely the things I would risk a lifetime ban for photographing or licking. The archive also includes products that I would not believe were official Nintendo products if I saw them anywhere else. This includes the Australian Game Boy, which had a decal of the country and the words Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Where the fuck did that come from? There were a few things I was surprised to see on display. The first 70 or so years of the company's history is summed up as the age of exploration. This covers the Hanafuda years, which were pretty consistent and chill, but it also covers the 1960s and 70s, which were the wildest period in Nintendo's history. These were the years that Hiroshi Yamauchi was the president of Nintendo. He ran the company from 1949 to 2002 when he was succeeded by Satoru Iwata. Under Yamauchi, Nintendo evolved from a small Kyoto-based card-making company to one of the most powerful and wealthiest companies on the planet. He managed that by walking a lot of weird little side paths. His theory was that products from the entertainment industry are unfortunately not indispensable. The playing cards market may one day collapse and give way to more entertaining products. That is why I wish to diversify Nintendo's activities towards more secure, more useful, and more promising markets. That quote comes from History of Nintendo 1889 to 1980 by Florent Gorget and Isao Yamazaki, which has an incredible depth of information about Nintendo's history. Although none of it is labeled, the material archive is pretty comprehensive of these side paths. They had a Nintendo cotton candy maker, a Nintendo rocker chair and stroller. They did have the Nintendo licensed Japanese Twister, sold as an exercise game instead of a horny touch-em-up game. They had all of the Coppolas, a series of mid-70s copying machines. It's said that the Coppolas were cheap to buy but designed to break down so that Nintendo could make their money back on repair costs. They had a light telephone, which projected voices using light waves instead of radio waves, and which I am personally obsessed with. It's a good thing this was behind glass, because yeah, I would have tried to lick it. There is also one thing I was genuinely shocked to see in the collection. I didn't even think about looking for it because I just took for granted that they wouldn't acknowledge it, and that was a DVD copy of Super Mario Bros., the original Mario movie. I couldn't believe it. Some of the displays cover the evolution of specific topics, like making music. These sections string together the artifacts into a kind of continuity to make through lines about how Nintendo has approached the same concept over the decades. From the Elikonga, a 1970s drum toy, to the BK bongos, from Mario Paint to the Labo piano. This feels like a reflection of Gumpei Yokoi's influence on the company. If you're not familiar with Yokoi and you're a millennial, he designed your childhood. He made the D-pad, he designed the Game Boy, among lots of other things. He was hired by Yamauchi as a repair technician for the Hanafuda assembly machines, but eventually started designing toys. Yokoi is arguably the person that moved Nintendo from a collection of wild strategies into being a digital toy company. Yokoi made a bunch of massive hit toys for Nintendo, like the Ultra Hand, the Ultra Machine, the Game & Watch, and the Love Tester, all of which you can see on display. On the first floor arcade, almost all the games you play are based on these works. There's also no mention of Yokoi in this museum, at least that I could see. If you did not arrive knowing about Yokoi's contribution to Nintendo and to video games as a whole, you will not leave this museum knowing it. His work is here, he is not. And that's the main thing missing from the museum. Any human presence. There's no mention of Yamauchi or Yokoi or any of the other engineers and artists that have made Nintendo a company worth knowing about. It's all about the product, nothing about the effort, innovation, or humanity that went into making them. You'd think that the one that created all of these products was simply Nintendo, a monolithic black box of a company. Aside from any acknowledgement of any human labor, there's two other big things that were missing from display that I was specifically looking out for. There is no mention of instant rice, and indeed, no mention of love hotels. The instant rice was Nintendo's first attempt at making something outside of toys back in the 1960s. Nintendo and some other partner organizations built a factory to make what would end up being pretty terrible instant rice. According to Gorges and Yamazaki, sources say that even Yamauchi found it inedible. They got out of that business pretty quickly. Love hotels are comparable to hourly hotels in America, except that their designs are way cooler. They were really popular in Japan in the 1960s, apparently following the banning of sex work in Japan. So it was kind of a timely investment. In History of Nintendo, Gorges and Yamazaki mentioned that newspapers at the time said the only benefit Yamauchi might have derived from this is that this time his partners and himself needn't pay for the rooms, and that might, in the end, constitute a substantial saving. But one man can't carry the whole love hotel industry on his back, so to speak. This was not a successful investment. For the record, I think it's totally fine that Nintendo invested in love hotels. I know people treat it as very salacious, but love hotels, like all of those nudie cards they printed, are not in keeping with the company's modern, very prudish branding. And this is what corporate museums do. They try to replace accurate historical narratives with an edited version that seems more definitive. A surprising amount of modern companies got their start offering quasi-legal underworld services and products. Then when they go legit, they try to scrub that history away, so it seems like they were always an upstanding company, while shunning the services, employees, and consumers that gave them their start. But we all know the original Nintendo company would have let me lick a love tester. It's easy to assume that Nintendo didn't include any of these ventures because it's ashamed of them, but I'm not certain that's the case. Not everything Nintendo made was a product, and not every product can be preserved. In the case of instant rice, Gorges and Yamazaki say that there is almost no documents remaining apart from a few badges and opened boxes from 1964. It's really hard to preserve food in an archive. And how do you represent physical services like love hotels or Nintendo's brief investment in taxi cabs? Well, you don't. But on the other hand, this whole wacky era of Nintendo's history was condensed down into one display case labeled the Age of Exploration 1960s. It contained exclusively the board games they made in the era. The product structure itself enables them to make these edits to their history. There's another huge issue with focusing on a physical archive. Nintendo, like a lot of media companies, is increasingly focused on digital exclusive releases. In fact, one of Nintendo's biggest products right now is digital only. There is no game box or manual to display for Pokemon Go. The way Pokemon Go is represented in the museum is with a few phone-shaped screenshots pasted up next to all the physical medium of years past. Is that the future of this museum? Still photos of phone interfaces? Are they even archiving any Pokemon Go footage? And how could that in any way capture the experience of playing it? The impression I get from the museum is that Nintendo wants you to believe it's a video game company. But consider the expansiveness of its merch, its lifestyle apps, its theme park offerings, and its movie studio. It's been said that Nintendo isn't a video game company, it's an IP company. They make worlds and characters you love and package them any way you might want to consume them. So of course they want you to care more about Mario, Donkey Kong, and Link than any of the people who made those characters. If any one of these side paths had been successful, today Nintendo might be a hotel chain, a food manufacturer, or a copier company. But because of people like Yamauchi and Yokoi, and because of cultural forces like the rise of small, cheap computer technology, it is what it is today. And that's the kind of thing a good museum can capture. They can remind us about all the attempts, failures, hopes, and dead ends the people at a company go through before finding hard-earned success. Fundamentally, this is the weakness in relying on a physical archive for your museum. There is simply more to the past than you can capture with just products.
Thank you for watching this video, and a very special thank you to George Fitzboodle and Zach. Your support puts the love in love hotels. Don't think too much about that one. There are a lot of reviews of the Nintendo Museum out there by fans or influencers, and at worst, those are incentivized to give positive reviews based on the person who is doing it. But even at best, those reviews aren't really tackling with the Nintendo Museum in an academic fashion, which is the way that it needs to be tackled, because they're saying it's a museum. So if you appreciate somebody looking at Nintendo as a company, both in good and bad ways, you should consider supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/thejenna. I have a ton of subscriber-exclusive travelogues from my time in Japan, as well as additional videos. I did a video review of the Nintendo Museum as a tourist destination, not as a museum. Here's a clip. I won, I got the best one. Now I'm engaged. The old ball and chain chomp. And you can watch the whole thing as well as a bunch of other videos at patreon.com/thejenna. I traveled thousands of miles to Japan to answer one question. How quickly do you die of heat stroke at 102 weather?